When I made the first A Twist at Home video, I did promise that I would take you to another corner of my home. And today, I'm going to show you 3 pieces that I live with on a daily basis. I think one of the biggest myths that we believe is that you ought to be wealthy in order for you to collect art, and that is simply not true. Some of my most favorite artworks cost less than lunch, and yet they have become some of my most treasured objects. One was a gift, one came from a thrift store, and the other one I bought it as a tourist souvenir. But together, they have completely changed the way that I think about collecting art. My name is Marilyn Mushakwe. I am a curator, researcher, and art advisor based in Zimbabwe. I've been in love with art for as long as I can remember, and I've spent years working with art, thinking about it, writing about it, advising buyers and collectors, as well as sitting with it in galleries as well as in homes. And the one thing I keep coming back to is this: art should not feel like it belongs to someone else. Welcome to A Twist at Home, a series where I invite you into the spaces we live in and the objects that we live with. Together, we'll explore how art becomes part of everyday life. My belief is that collections do not begin with collectors. They begin with one object that someone could not leave behind. And this is one of those objects. This is a ndiro, or a bowl, from the Chapungu Sculpture Park collection. It was made by the artist Addington Nyasoka and made from leopard rock, which is a particularly hard stone to sculpt. And knowing that makes me appreciative of the amount of skill, the amount of effort, and the amount of work that went into creating this artwork. But for me, what makes this object a lot more interesting is the story that is held within the form itself. A ndiro is a bowl or a plate, and culturally it carries a very particular memory. In many of our Zimbabwean homes, food was shared in communal dishes. Sadza would be placed in one ndiro, and then the relish would be placed in another one. And people would gather around the same plate to eat. There's something deeply meaningful about that ritual. And for me, it speaks to connection, it speaks to generosity, it speaks to trust. There is a kind of trust that exists in dipping into the same plate with someone, in sharing food, and in sharing space. There is a Shona proverb that says, "Ukama igasha, unozadziswa nekudya." It speaks to the idea that relationships are nourished and strengthened through the act of sharing food. And every time I look at this ndiro, this bowl, I'm reminded of that wisdom. The understanding that food is about more than just the nourishment. It is about belonging, it is about community, it is about the relationships that we form with one another. So even though this ndiro now sits on one of my side tables, sometimes holding snacks or a fruit and not a meal, it still carries that memory. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of gathering, I'm reminded of sharing, and I'm reminded of the relationships that are built around food. What makes this piece a lot more special to me is that I did not buy it. It actually was given to me as a gift. And I think gifts have a special place in any collection, because every time you look at them, you are reminded of the person that chose those gifts for you. The story of the object becomes connected to the story of the relationship. So as much as I admire the craftsmanship, I do treasure the generosity that is behind it. The second object has a completely different story. I bought this for $3 in a thrift store, and I still think it's one of the most beautiful things in my house. It's a Malaysian 10 moku pottery wall vase with this beautiful pressed leaf design. I'm pretty sure you can see it behind me. So when I bought it, I had no idea what it was at first. I just knew that I liked it. I absolutely love treasure hunting. That is exactly what thrift stores feel like to me. You never really know what you're going to find, and every now and then you come across something that is completely unexpected. And I think that is part of the joy. You learn to trust your own eye and your own curiosity. I also appreciate the mastery that went into making this piece. Someone imagined a vase that hangs on a wall instead of sitting on a table. And I love that small shift in perspective. It hangs on the same wall as paintings and framed prints, and I love that. A vase is not usually something you expect to see on a gallery wall, and yet here it is. Sometimes it holds flowers, sometimes it doesn't. Either way, it reminds me that beauty is not only in what an object is meant to do, it is also about how we choose to live with it. The last object is probably the smallest, but it does carry some of the biggest ideas for me. It is a small soapstone sculpture of the Great Zimbabwe cone or tower. If you've traveled around Zimbabwe, you probably have seen sculptures like this on the roadside markets or even on the curio and craft markets. Soapstone is much softer than the leopard stone we looked at earlier, as well as other hard stone, and so that makes it much easier to carve. And because of that, it is usually used to make objects for tourists, occasionally referred to as airport art. The phrase airport art was coined by Frank McEwen, the founding director of what was then the National Gallery of Rhodesia. It's a conversation that I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about and even writing about. And it is a conversation that continues to shape how we think about art, craft, and the tourist market. But whenever I look at this little sculpture, my thoughts return to something a lot more personal. I don't think I fully understood what the Great Zimbabwe meant until I stood in the ruins myself. Walking through those ruins felt sacred. I kept thinking about the people who built this place, their thoughts, their imaginations, the engineering that went into this, their understanding of architecture and community. It reminded me that our history is so much bigger than the versions of Africa many of us inherited through colonial education. As someone who studies Zimbabwean art and culture, I love having this reminder of the Great Zimbabwe in my home. It sits on my bookshelf together with other books on art and culture, which somehow feels appropriate. So every time that I reach for a book, I see it, and it reminds me of where I come from. It reminds me that brilliance has always existed here. When I look around my house, I don't just see beautiful objects. I see gifts from people I care about. I see discoveries from secondhand shops. I see reminders of the places that I've been, the histories I've studied, and the memories that I've collected along the way. And that, to me, is what a collection really is. It is a reflection of the life that you've lived. So if you've ever thought that collecting art is just for wealthy people and experts, I would encourage you to look around your own home. There may already be an object on your shelf, or on your coffee table, or on your wall that you have loved for years without ever thinking of it as part of a collection. Maybe that's where your collection begins.